Ready for an adventure? Today we're taking a deep dive into a place that's often overlooked, but trust me, it's packed with surprises. We're heading to Bolivia.
Ah, Bolivia. It's a country that truly embodies the phrase hidden gem. You don't always hear a lot about it, but it's got this incredible blend of contrasts, geographically, culturally, historically.
Yeah, that's what caught my eye when I was looking at all the research. I mean, the landscape alone is just mind-blowing. You've got the Andes Mountains towering over everything with Lake Titicaca, which is, the highest navigable lake anywhere in the world.
And that's not all. You've got these vast stretches of Amazon rainforest teeming with life. And then on a completely different note, you've got the Salar de Uyuni, which are these huge, surreal salt flats.
It's like they took all the coolest landscapes in South America and crammed them into one country.
It's a truly unique place, that's for sure. And the diversity isn't just limited to the landscape either. The climates are just as varied. You can go from glacial cold in the Andes to tropical heat in the lowlands.
Talk about a place that keeps you on your toes. But it's not just about the scenery, right? Bolivia's got a really fascinating cultural side, too.
Absolutely. One of the things that makes Bolivia so special is that it has the largest proportion of indigenous people in the Americas.
Really? Larger than any other country in the region.
That's right. And these indigenous groups, they're not just a small part of the population, they're central to Bolivian identity.
So who are we talking about here? What are some of the major indigenous groups in Bolivia?
Well, you've got the Quechua and the Aymara, who have a long history tied to the ancient Inca Empire. But you also have the Guarani and a whole host of others.
Wow. And each of these groups has their own distinct language and culture, I imagine?
Exactly. And get this, Bolivia actually recognizes 36 indigenous languages as official languages alongside Spanish.
36? That's amazing.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine the diversity of experiences and perspectives that must exist within Bolivia.
It's a truly multicultural society. And that multiculturalism extends to their religious practices, too. They have this interesting mix of indigenous beliefs and Catholicism.
So you might see an ancient ritual being performed right next to a Catholic mass.
Exactly. It's a unique blend of the old and the new, the indigenous and the colonial.
And speaking of colonial influences, let's dive into Bolivia's history, because it sounds like it's been anything but smooth sailing.
You could say that again. It's a history full of dramatic twists and turns. I mean, we're talking about a country that went from being part of powerful pre-colonial empires like the Tiwanaku and the Inca to being colonized by the Spanish and then finally fighting for its independence in the early 1800s.
Yeah, that's a lot to go through. And I'm guessing the fight for independence was just the beginning of the challenges, right?
Unfortunately, yes. After independence, Bolivia faced a whole new set of obstacles. For example, in the 19th and 20th centuries, they lost significant chunks of their territory to neighboring countries in various wars and disputes.
Oof, that must have been tough. And then there's all the political turmoil that seems to have plagued Bolivia for much of the 20th century.
That's a big part of the story, too. They had a period marked by military coups, dictatorships, social unrest, you name it. One of the most striking figures from this period is Hugo Banzer.
Banzer, the dictator.
Yeah, he ruled with an iron fist for a while. But here's the crazy part. He later came back to power through democratic elections. It's pretty wild.
That's quite a twist.
Yeah.
It seems like things started to shift a bit in the 21st century, though, at least from what I've read.
You're right. The election of Evo Morales in 2005 was a real turning point. He became Bolivia's first indigenous president, which was a huge moment for the country. He really focused on economic and social reforms aimed at helping marginalized communities, especially the indigenous population.
But Morales is also a bit of a controversial figure, right? I mean, I've seen some pretty mixed opinions about his legacy.
Yeah, it's definitely complex. He did a lot of good in terms of improving the lives of many Bolivians, especially the poorest and most marginalized. But he also faced criticism for concentrating power, eroding democratic institutions, and trying to stay in office for longer than many people thought was appropriate.
So it's kind of a mixed bag then. Some real progress, but also some worrying trends. And of course, all of that culminated in his resignation in 2019, right, after that whole election fraud controversy.
Yeah, that was a really turbulent period. Morales' departure and the subsequent interim government left the country pretty divided.
So what's the situation now? Where does Bolivia stand today, politically?
Well, after the interim government, Luis Artes, who was a close ally of Morales, won the presidential election in 2020. He promised to continue many of Morales' socialist policies. But he's also got a lot on his plate in terms of trying to heal those political divisions and deal with the various economic challenges facing the country. So we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? from towering mountains to dense rainforests, ancient empires to modern-day political dramas.
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind tour of Bolivian geography, culture, and history. But there's one piece of the puzzle we haven't really delved into yet, and that's the economy.
Right, because all of those factors, they play a role in shaping Bolivia's economic realities. And one of the key things to understand is that it's a country that's historically struggled with poverty.
Yeah, and I get the sense that this poverty isn't just a recent thing, right? It seems deeply rooted in Bolivia's past.
You hit the nail on the head there. It goes back centuries, really. Think about the Spanish colonial period, when Bolivia was basically this massive silver mine for the Spanish Empire.
Oh, right, Potosi, that legendary silver mountain.
Exactly. The Spanish extracted enormous wealth from Potosi and other mines, but they didn't exactly reinvest that wealth back into Bolivia or its people. It was a classic case of resource extraction without fair compensation.
And unfortunately, that pattern, that kind of exploitation, it didn't just end with Spanish colonialism, did it?
Sadly, no. It continued in different forms throughout Bolivia's history. They've got this abundance of natural resources, minerals, natural gas, you name it. But they've often struggled to translate that wealth into widespread prosperity for their citizens.
So we're talking about what economists call the resource curse, right?
Yeah.
Where having all those valuable resources can actually be a hindrance to development.
Exactly. It's a complex issue with no easy answers. But in recent years, Bolivia has made some pretty bold moves to try and break free from that cycle. Like in 2006, under Evo Morales, they nationalized their hydrocarbon resources.
Yeah, that was a pretty big deal, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Real statement about taking control of their own destiny.
It was. It signaled a shift away from the kind of neoliberal economic policies that were popular in the 90s with all the privatization and deregulation. Morales wanted a more state-led approach to development.
And it wasn't just about nationalizing resources, right? Morales also implemented a whole bunch of social programs, things like direct cash transfers to poor families, expanded access to health care, and initiatives to support indigenous communities and farmers.
Exactly. He really wanted to tackle poverty and inequality head-on. And there's no doubt that those programs had a real impact on the lives of many Bolivians. Even his critics will admit that.
But I imagine there was also some pushbacks and concerns about the potential downsides to those programs.
Oh, absolutely. Some argued that they weren't sustainable in the long term, that they could create a dependency on government assistance. Others worried about corruption and inefficiency in state-run enterprises. And of course, you had those who felt that Morales was unfairly favoring certain groups, like indigenous communities, at the expense of others.
So as with any large-scale social program, it's a mixed bag, right? You have the intended positive outcomes, but also some potential unintended consequences.
That's a good way to put it. And now, with President Arce, it's about finding that balance, figuring out how to continue those social programs while also dealing with the other economic challenges they're facing.
Like, what kind of challenges are we talking about specifically?
Well, inflation is a big concern, and the pandemic really hit certain sectors, like tourism, pretty hard. And then there's the ongoing question of how to diversify the economy, move beyond that reliance on natural resources.
Right, because even with lithium, which we talked about earlier, that's just one piece of the puzzle. They need to develop other sectors too.
Exactly. Agriculture is one area with a lot of potential. Bolivia could be a major food producer.
Yeah.
But they need to invest in things like modernizing farming practices, improving infrastructure in rural areas, that sort of thing.
And I've also heard that they're trying to promote ecotourism, taking advantage of those incredible landscapes, while also making sure it's done in a way that benefits local communities.
Yeah, that's another promising avenue, but again, it requires careful planning and investment. They have to make sure they're protecting the environment and respecting local cultures, not just exploiting them for profit.
So it sounds like Bolivia's kind of at a crossroads, right? They've made real progress in reducing poverty and empowering certain groups, but they're still grappling with these complex economic questions and trying to chart a sustainable path forward.
It's a fascinating story, really, because it's not just about economics. It's about politics, identity, the soul of a nation trying to figure out its place in the world.
And I think that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. It's not just about facts and figures. It's about understanding the human story behind it all.
Exactly. And to really get a feel for that human story, I think we need to go beyond the macro level, beyond the politics and economics, and try to get a sense of what everyday life feels like in Bolivia.
Like, what's the vibe on the streets? What are the people like? What are those unique little details that really bring a place to life?
Well, imagine walking down a bustling street in La Paz, their capital city, which is high up in the Andes. You're surrounded by this incredible mix of people. You've got indigenous women in their traditional dress, businessmen in suits, young people with piercings and tattoos, street vendors selling all sorts of things. It's a vibrant, chaotic scene.
I can almost picture it. And what about the food? What are some of the flavors that define Bolivian cuisine?
Oh, it's a delicious mix of Andean staples and indigenous influences. Think hearty stews with quinoa, potatoes, llama meat, all sorts of interesting ingredients.
Llama meat. That's not something you see on every menu.
It's a bit of an acquired taste, maybe, but it's very traditional, and it really speaks to that connection to the land and its resources.
So it's about more than just filling your belly. It's about connecting with the culture, the history, the very essence of the place.
Exactly. And speaking of connecting with the essence of a place, I think it's time we delved into the heart of Bolivian culture, explore the music, the art, the festivals, all the things that make this country so vibrant and alive.
Okay, so we've trekked through the mountains, we've navigated the political landscape, we've even tasted some llama meat, or at least imagined it.
Now it's time to tap into that vibrant energy, that soul of Bolivia, the culture.
Yeah, let's dive into the music, the art, the festivals, the food, all the things that make this country so unique.
Get ready for a sensory overload.
I'm all in. So, when we talk about Bolivian music, what kind of sounds are we talking about? What comes to mind?
Well, imagine this. You've got these haunting Andean melodies, those pan flute sounds you often hear in nature documentaries, mixed with the rhythms of Afro-Bolivian drumming. And then on top of that, you've got the energy of Latin American pop.
Wow, that's quite a mix. It sounds like the music itself reflects the diversity of the country.
Exactly. And music in Bolivia, it's not just something you listen to in the background. It's woven into the fabric of life, you know?
I can imagine. It's part of the celebrations, the rituals, the everyday moments.
Absolutely. Whether it's a traditional festival, a family gathering, or even a protest march, music is always there.
It's a way of expressing themselves, connecting with their emotions, their history.
Exactly. And speaking of celebrations, we can't forget about those incredible carnival celebrations, especially the one in Oruro. Yeah.
The Carnival of Oruro, I've seen some pictures, and it looks absolutely wild.
It's an experience unlike any other. Imagine thousands of dancers in these elaborate, colorful costumes moving to the rhythm of traditional music. The energy is electric.
I bet. But there's got to be more to it than just a big party, right?
Yeah.
What's the deeper meaning behind it all?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of symbolism and history there. It's a mix of indigenous traditions and Catholic beliefs. They're honoring Pachamama, the Andean earth goddess, but also the Virgin of Socavon, the patron saint of miners. It's a celebration of faith, heritage, community.
Wow, that's fascinating. So it's like a fusion of different cultural and religious influences all coming together.
Exactly. It's a powerful expression of Bolivian identity. And it's not just Oruro either. These kinds of carnival celebrations happen all across the country.
Each with its own unique flavor, I imagine.
Exactly. But that sense of joy, that energy, that connection to their roots, it's a common thread.
It sounds amazing. Okay, so we've got the music, we've got the festivals. What about the art? What are some of the art forms that really stand out in Bolivia?
Well, you've got to start with the textiles. Those colorful weavings with the intricate patterns, it's amazing stuff.
Yeah, I've seen some of those in museums. The colors are incredible.
And they're not just pretty to look at, they tell stories, they represent different aspects of their culture, their history.
Like wearing a piece of art, a piece of their heritage.
Exactly. And then you've got the ceramics, the pottery, often decorated with animal motifs or these abstract designs. And you can't forget about the street art scene in cities like La Paz. There are some really incredible murals that deal with social and political issues.
So it's like art is everywhere in Bolivia. From these ancient traditions to these modern expressions, it's all connected.
It's woven into the fabric of their lives, just like the music.
It's a beautiful thing. Okay, last but not least, we've got to talk about the food. What are some of the must-try dishes in Bolivia?
Well, you can't go wrong with some of those traditional Andean staples hearty stews with quinoa, potatoes, llama meat.
Llama meat, I'm telling you, that's not something you find just anywhere.
Right. It's a unique flavor for sure. And then you've got all sorts of dishes with corn, beans, spicy peppers, a lot of indigenous influences there.
And I've heard about these things called salteñas. Are those like empanadas?
Kind of. They're savory pastries filled with meat, vegetables, a delicious sauce. They're a classic street food, a perfect quick bite.
So, all in all, Bolivian cuisine is a real melting pot of flavors, just like the culture itself.
You got it. It's a blend of Andean ingredients, indigenous traditions, and Spanish influences.
Sounds delicious. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored the mountains, the rainforests, the history, the politics, the economy, and now the culture. It's been quite a journey.
And I think what strikes me most about Bolivia is the resilience of the people. They've faced so many challenges, so much hardship, but they've always found a way to bounce back, to keep their culture alive, to find joy in the midst of struggle.
Yeah, it's inspiring. And it's a reminder that even in a world that often feels divided and chaotic, there's still so much beauty, so much diversity, so much to learn from each other.
Exactly. So, to our listeners, if you're ever feeling a little lost or discouraged, just think about Bolivia. Think about that spirit of resilience, that vibrant culture, that unique blend of contrasts. It's a reminder that there's still so much good in the world, so much to explore, so much to celebrate.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into Bolivia. Thanks for joining us on this adventure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, keep an open mind. There's a whole world out there waiting to be discovered.